Hello and welcome to Race for the White House, our daily show on the US presidential elections 2024. Today's top story is on pollsters and whether pollsters will call the election right this time. Also on the show, we have new revelations from the January 6th riots that could prove to be a headache for Donald Trump. All of this and much more, so let's get started. There's one feature of every election cycle that you can't miss: election polls. While everyone watches these polls closely to decide which way the race is going, there's increased skepticism about whether they can really get the mood of the nation right. For example, polls in the 2016 election missed the mark in various key states. However, they underestimated Trump's support in states like Pennsylvania and Michigan, which led to him shattering the blue wall that the Democrats had enjoyed in presidential elections in the past. However, the national polls were not that far off in 2016. They showed that Hillary Clinton would win the popular vote, which she did. The 2020 polls, on the other hand, were less accurate. They also correctly predicted that Joe Biden would win, so the mistakes weren't as widely noticed, but they also still overestimated support for Biden in key states. With the elections so tight in 2024, polls are one of the best ways we have to know how the election will go. So will the polls be right in 2024 after a mixed record in the past? Looking back at the polling over the last few years, errors seem to have happened in almost every election. Pollsters will make their best guesses about who will vote, but they can never be 100% right. People may change their minds on election day or vote unexpectedly. In some years, support for the Democratic Party has been overestimated, whereas the opposite effect applies to Republicans in other years. Polls in swing states are also often off. According to an analysis by the New York Times, state polls were off by an average of 3.1 points between 2000 and 2020. Especially in 2016 and 2020, polls in key states like Wisconsin overestimated support enjoyed by the Democrats. Some voters actually think that the polls are biased towards Democrats and against Donald Trump. Pollsters have made mistakes in the past. That is important because since 2016, non-college educated voters have shifted strongly towards Donald Trump and the Republican Party. Now, pollsters made adjustments for this in 2020, but even then they still missed the mark on Trump's support levels. Experts believe that Trump voters are also less likely to answer surveys. Now, record turnout also made polling tricky in 2020. Accordingly, over one quarter of voters that year hadn't actually voted in 2016. Pollsters thought that these new voters would actually favor Biden, but they split more evenly between the two candidates. So where does that leave us for 2024? This is key because polling in swing states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin showed that Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are neck and neck. While polls underestimated Trump in 2016 and 2020, past errors don't necessarily guarantee future results. Many pollsters have actually changed their methods in the hopes of being more accurate. And that has worked in some cases. For example, the 2022 midterm election polls actually got a lot of things right. But despite improvements, pollsters are still cautious about the upcoming election. In many cases, they're trying a new approach, which includes asking people who they voted for in the last election. And the idea is to balance out differences in those who respond to polls, particularly, as we mentioned before, since Democrats are more likely to answer to polls than Republicans. But with Donald Trump on the ballot, it's difficult to predict how public support will evolve and how the polls will bear up against reality. Moving on, the much-awaited Al Smith Memorial Dinner took place in New York yesterday. Now, in the past, the dinner has been a key part of the US presidential election cycle. Traditionally, both candidates from the Democratic and Republican Party show up to the event and give a speech. These speeches in the past have really been quite funny, and they allow voters to see a different side to presidential contenders. Candidates use the speeches to poke fun at their opponents and also at themselves. They've also used the opportunity to praise and appreciate opposing candidates. All in all, the Al Smith dinner allows even bitterly opposed candidates to come together for one night, share some humor, and work for a common cause. After all, the dinner also allows millions of dollars to be raised for Catholic charities in the state of New York. But as America becomes more polarized, it seems the space for such events has shrunk, and nowhere was that more true than in the 2024 Al Smith dinner. Kamala Harris skipped the dinner entirely, which was somewhat unprecedented and generated some anger against her. Now, Trump did make an appearance, but his speech was as far away from the spirit of the dinner as possible. Trump used his speech to insult Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and other key Democratic politicians. Trump also made a joke mocking transgender people and Tim Walz. He insulted Kamala Harris's intelligence and her speaking ability. He added that he didn't like Biden, but now likes him compared to Kamala Harris. Trump also refused to make jokes at his own expense, which candidates have traditionally done to show their own human side. He in fact claimed that he's been treated worse than any president in American history. And finally, Trump also criticized Harris's absence from the dinner and said it was disrespectful to the Catholic community. While the event has always been seen as a civil and relaxed break in an otherwise bitter election battle, it seems like the polarization and division affecting America has also afflicted the Adsmith dinner. Moving on, fresh disclosures of the January 6th Capitol riots case are set to pose a new headache for Donald Trump. A federal judge has just dismissed a bid by Trump's legal team to stop disclosure of new evidence in this case. Trump's lawyers argue that releasing new evidence now could mislead voters and also believe it could unfairly impact the upcoming November 5th election. Now, the evidence was scheduled to be released following a recent court order. However, Trump's lawyers want to block this release until after the election, and they argue that it is essential for the public to understand both sides. They also want to avoid one-sided narratives that could influence public opinion. Now, the charges against Trump in this case allege that he engaged in a criminal scheme, which was aimed to overturn the 2020 presidential election results. Special counsel Jack Smith claims that Trump acted outside his official duties on January 6, 2021, when large crowds mobbed America's Capitol Hill and threatened the lives of senior political leaders. Smith argues that Trump pursued illegal means to disrupt the 2020 election process. In earlier filings, Smith has also countered Trump's claim of presidential immunity. He stated that Trump's action during the January 6 riots were not part of his official role as president. US District Judge Tanya Chutkin has emphasized that political consequences should not influence the case. She insists that the case must focus solely on the principles of justice. The outcome could have significant implications for the upcoming election on November 5th. Joining us now to discuss the implications of this whole development is Rohit Sharma, our White House correspondent. Rohit, thanks so much for joining us. Could you take it away and tell us a little bit about what's happened in court? What has the federal judge ruled? What is the background to this entire case of the January 6th riots?
Look, this is the out of the many cases that Donald Trump had, this is the January 6th case that has been delayed. Now, remember, this was supposed to go to trial in March, and now it may not even go to trial. But important thing is, after Supreme Court gave President Trump immunity, Judge Chutkin had come out and said, told the special counsel Jack Smith to refile based on the order that was given by Supreme Court, to resubmit all the evidence. And this is the evidence that President Trump does not want people to see before the election. So today, earlier in the day, they talked about, how it was important that these evidences or these proofs do not come out in public domain before the election. And Judge Chutkin then basically went ahead and said she looked at the filing from Trump's lawyers, and she basically ruled that she will allow these proofs, these documents to be unsealed and redacted tomorrow, which is Friday. It is a very interesting timing. Look, President Trump obviously knows that this could harm his re-election. This could possibly, what he says is that could lead to, what his surrogates have been terming as election interference. But I think, the judge has faulted President Trump's lawyers for what she termed them as political arguments rather than engaging with relevant factors to justify, the sealing of this evidence in this case.
Thanks, Rohit. Rohit, could you tell us a little bit about whether you think that the revelations that could come out in this case, would they impact how voters would see Donald Trump? Do you think it's actually going to swing votes either one way or the other in this election cycle?
It does. It does a lot to damage. And again, look, the people, the public, they haven't been able to see, what evidence does Special Counsel Jack Smith has here. We've obviously covered this in great detail as to, the January 6 riots and did President Trump play a role in it or not. I think that's at stake. The fact of the matter is that some people have told us that there are text messages and there are call details that could lead President Trump directly or to the that could lead him, in criminal violation of what happened on January 6th. And people probably do, some voters might want to see that before they cast their votes. So it is a very, very interesting day here in DC. We'll probably have another interesting day tomorrow. when these documents are released and some of the evidences are redacted. So it might also be a chance for Vice President Kamala Harris to use some of this in political ads and in her speeches, which is what the Trump campaign did not want.
And Rohit, last question before I let you go. Could you tell us why Trump did not want this evidence to be made public?
It could very well sway the votes. It could very well help Vice President Kamala Harris win some of the independent voters, some Republicans even, who haven't made up their mind yet as to who they want to vote for. It's all possible that some of the evidences could be damning, they could be shocking. This eventually could be the October surprise that we talked about last week. So there is the potential of this shifting the election, and that's exactly why the lawyers of President Trump did not want this to come out before the election. Now that the judge has made a decision, we'll probably see, what kind of evidence has Jack Smith submitted. Now, the other aspect of this is that, Trump voters do not really get impacted by any of this, so he's not going to be losing.
And now it's time to turn to our segment, Poll Watch, where we talk numbers. With less than a month to go for the US presidential polls, the race remains intense. Vice President Kamala Harris maintains her slim national lead, but in the swing states, polls are moving up and down every single day. So let's take a look at how the presidential contenders are doing in the polls today. According to the New York Times Siena poll, Harris still leads nationally with a 49% approval rating, while Harris is trailing at 47% of public support. In the swing state of Pennsylvania, Harris has a 49-48 advantage over Trump. But in the crucial state of Wisconsin, Trump has gained, and now the two candidates are tied at 49% of public support. In the states of Michigan and North Carolina, both Harris and Trump are locked in at 48%. In Nevada, it's Harris who has surged ahead, and she is now leading Trump with a 48-47 advantage. In the state of Georgia, Trump has now taken a lead with 49% of public support, while Harris is at 48%. With just a few weeks remaining for the elections, the race remains as tight as ever. And now it's time to bring you some updates from US politics that you might have missed. An independent panel has called for major changes in the United States Secret Service. This comes after repeated failures to prevent assassination attempts on former President Donald Trump, including one in July. The panel described the Secret Service as bureaucratic, complacent, and static. The panel warned that without reforms, future assassination attempts could occur. Remember that in July, Trump was grazed by an assassin's bullet during an attack at a campaign rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. The gunman, Thomas Crooks, was killed by a Secret Service sniper. The report highlighted specific security failures, many of which were already acknowledged by the agency. It noted a troubling lack of critical thinking during security planning by the Secret Service. The review also suggested that the Secret Service needs new leadership with outside experience. It also recommended that the agency focus solely on protecting high-profile officials. The report also emphasized that fundamental reform is necessary for the Secret Service to fulfill its mission. Moving on, Donald Trump recently blamed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky for the war in Ukraine. He claimed that Zelensky should never have allowed the conflict to start. Trump also stated that President Joe Biden instigated that war, insisting that it wouldn't have happened if he was still president. However, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine has roots going back more than a decade. In 2014, Vladimir Putin used disguised troops to seize parts of eastern Ukraine and Crimea. The situation escalated in 2022 with Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Now, Trump in the past has shown increasingly friendly rhetoric towards the Russian leader. During a debate last month with Kamala Harris, he did not clearly state whether he believed Ukraine should win. Journalist Bob Woodward has actually reported that Trump called Putin several times since leaving office. He also sent COVID-19 testing equipment to Putin during his presidency. Trump's friendship with the Russian president has been a persistent issue in the US election 2024, and Kamala Harris has attacked him viciously for it. Now, Trump in the past has promised to negotiate a deal that would benefit both Russia and Ukraine. And he emphasized that under his presidency, Russia has not taken any territory. He also emphasized that under his presidency, Russia did not take any territory. But his relationship with Russia and Vladimir Putin remains a significant issue of controversy in the 2024 presidential election. And finally, as election day nears, swing states are seeing a massive influx of political spending, some of which might actually be fairly dubious. For example, Elon Musk is offering Americans $47 for each swing state voter they recruit to support Donald Trump. Meanwhile, Democratic groups are paying at least $160 to over 75,000 voters. These voters are asked to contact friends and family to support Kamala Harris. In Philadelphia, a non-profit plans to mail 102,000 comic books to voters under 32. For those preferring fun over politics, there are also free concerts and street festivals near early voting centers. Other organizations are hiring thousands of people to knock on doors and make phone calls about voting. These efforts are not affiliated with the presidential campaigns or with political parties. Instead, they are part of a vast and slightly shadowy network designed to mobilize unlikely voters in key swing states. Funded largely without public disclosure, these operations have been in preparation for years, and they aim to provide the final push needed to influence the upcoming election. But they also raise troubling questions about the role of money in American politics and how much election money reform needs to happen. Thank you so much for watching Race for the White House with me, Shashank Batu. That's all we have for you this week. We'll catch you again on Monday, only on India Today Global.